Hello, I'm Diane Sawyer, and this is side one of an interactive video disc, a special report on the Bay Area earthquake of 1989. This side of the disc highlights the moments before, during, and after the quake struck Northern California. What you see, and in what order you see it, is entirely up to you. What were people doing when the quake hit? And what was it like after the earth stopped rumbling? Who suffered the most, and who were the heroes? And finally, how was the story reported across the nation? Explore what interests you by going directly to the topics you want. Remember, relive, and learn from the Quake of '89. It used to be rare to capture an earthquake on film or videotape. Not anymore, as more and more people keep video cameras at home or travel with them. The Bay Area quake was captured for us by a legion of instant journalists.
Stay here.
At second base, so the Oakland A's take.
I'll tell you what, we're having an earthquake.
We're on the Oakland Bay Bridge. It's just a little bit after the earthquake. They sent us down here, surprisingly, in the wrong direction. There's another car. Gosh!
It was just after 5 o'clock in the afternoon in San Francisco, and much of the nation's attention had turned to the annual fall classic, the World Series. ABC's sports commentators Al Michaels and Tim McCarver were on the air with ABC's pregame broadcast. ABC's cameras captured the moments of and immediately after the quake.
For the first time in 27 years, a World Series game will be played in Candlestick Park. The Battle of the Bay continues. Game 3 of the 1989 World Series, the Oakland Athletics against the San Francisco Giants.
Handy Maldonado with the hesitation, allowing Jose Canseco to score, and he fails to get Dave Parker at second base, so the Oakland A's take.
I'll tell you what, we're having an earthquake. I don't know if we're on the air or not, and I'm not sure I care in this particular moment, but we are. Well, folks, that's the greatest open in the history of television, bar none.
Earthquake was it?
An earthquake.
I don't know.
Nobody knows. It knocked all the TVs and everything out.
All the TVs and the radios went out.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. In the case of an emergency, fans that are seated in the upper deck are asked to proceed to the nearest available exit.
No one was certain as to the extent of the structural damage, but it appeared to be relatively minor, all things considered. The fans eventually moved toward the exits in orderly fashion. Medical attention was needed by a few spectators, and then the wives and children of the players there, Terry Steinbach and his wife, Mark McGuire and his wife, Rick Russell of the Giants and his family, joined each other on the field. Commissioner Fay Vincent then had it announced to the crowd.
There has been a power failure. Therefore, the game will be postponed.
We would like you to leave in an orderly way. I don't believe there's any great danger, but we have no idea when the power is going to be on, and we have to get people out of here before it gets dark. Please leave. The game has been postponed. There'll be no baseball tonight.
Look.
When news began to break of a major earthquake in California, news organizations across the country began to scramble. Communications were affected by the quake, so the television networks and local stations put their emergency plans into effect as best they could.
We interrupt our regular program schedule to bring you a special report from ABC News.
I'm Ted Koppel. There has been a rather strong earthquake in Northern California, so strong, in fact,
I would say that we've got a borderline regional catastrophe here.
Well, this is classified as a strong earthquake. It has plenty of energy to cause damage. And
this is Al Michaels. I'm in our production truck. You're looking at a fire, obviously, in the city of San Francisco. Just to
right, gas is a major problem. It was in 1906 and it is today.
We were painting on the second floor, and everything just started shaking, and it's a plaster.
And we have had 4 patients in tonight, one of whom just died of cardiac arrest. The others are victims of things falling on them, and at this point...
The epicenter has not yet been pinpointed, although it did not take very long for the main thrust of the jolt to hit here. So I would imagine that...
A Richter 7 magnitude on that segment of the fault is probably as large as that segment could generate. But we could expect aftershocks in the Richter 5 to 6 range. In all likelihood, they will
The latest information the White House has, and of course this is the worrisome thing, is that the greatest damage is in the Santa Cruz area.
Much of the information and much of the video that we're getting at this hour is coming from our San Francisco affiliate, KGO.
It's been a frightening scene here. As you can see, just below me is where this crack in the Bay Bridge occurred, a 50-foot section. You see down there below the two cars that were on the upper deck when the bridge collapsed. They fell below. We understand that the people in both of those cars did get out safely.
I'm at the corner of Jefferson and Divisadero. You can see this building is collapsed. They don't know if people are still in there or if they aren't. You can see the fire down past me. What has happened is that the natural gas lines have ruptured, and that is what has caused that fire. The water lines have ruptured. There is no water coming out of the fire hydrant. We were down at number 2 Cervantes. Another building like this one had collapsed. I had 2 deaths confirmed there.
This is obviously an area that has been very hard hit. Fire crews coming into this inferno as apartment buildings collapsed. Remember, the Marina District was filled for is landfill, and therefore a number of the very expensive apartments and townhouses in this area have collapsed, fire burning unchecked. This was a 4-story building, and that's the kind of problem. They are trying to evacuate people who may have been inside. A lot of people at home at that time or during the commute hour as the earthquake struck at 5:04 this afternoon in Northern California. We have an unofficial word, or it perhaps is official now, 7 people. We know 7 people have died in this crash, including the one, or in this quake rather, including the one when an old building south of Market collapsed on people in automobiles. And this, if it indeed is the big one that we've heard so much about, and people trying to do whatever they can to stop the fire, but part of the problem, obviously, is gas.
Store water, prepare for aftershocks, prepare for 3 days of no services. You got 90 minutes of light left. You better make use of your time.
It's looking bad over here in Oakland. The electricity is out in much of the city, and we have a bad freeway collapse. It's that ramp of the Nimitz Freeway that goes from Cypress Street on up to the Bay Bridge. About a 6 or 7 block stretch of it collapsed during the earthquake. There have been ambulances going in and out of here all evening long. We understand as many as 30 or 40 ambulances, and preliminary reports right now are that there may be as many as 8 to 40 dead.
When the earthquake struck, it severed a main artery in the Bay Area, the Bay Bridge, linking San Francisco with Oakland and East Bay. Thomas and Debbie Kelly, tourists from Oklahoma, happened to be on the bridge when the quake struck. They stopped, set up their videotape camera, and recorded what you were about to see.
We're on the Oakland Bay Bridge, just a little bit after the earthquake. They sent us down here, surprisingly, in the wrong direction. There's another car. Gosh! That could have been us, but yeah, that could have been us, but we just turned around. Thomas, we need to go down there and help.
It was more like a mirage where you see the steam rising off the highway. It's something there you don't know until you get right up on it. And we turned at the last minute and we had the video running and started shooting. We thought this was a great vacation video. And all of a sudden the car fell in.
Gosh!
We were more surprised and shocked than anybody.
The Coast Guard landed on the deck there and was really unable to do anything. Then the Caltrans people, who are some sort of, I guess, the bridge police, they took 3 wreckers to pull the car up. Really were unable to help the people in the car, both the driver and the passenger, because it really looked like the car was going over at any moment.
Most of those who died in the earthquake of '89 were killed when a long section of Interstate 880 in Oakland collapsed. When the quake hit, the top deck of the interstate gave way. Many of the drivers on the bottom deck never had a chance. The drama of searching for the survivors and finding the victims was the focus of national attention for days.
When I looked up and I saw all the cars tumbling and all the guardrails falling off and everything, I thought, oh my God, it's an earthquake. And then I thought maybe it was a bomb.
This was like the 7th ring of hell. It was eerie, it was still, it was twilight, and it kept reminding me of Alice in Wonderland, where things were slightly skewed.
We couldn't believe it. This is like Oakland. It's never happened to Oakland before. And we were just thanking God that we still alive. I just wanted to help someone. I mean, I knew that it was dangerous, but it was more like I was driven by determination to help someone.
We was coming over this over-ramp right here coming off the bridge, and we just stopped. And all I could say is, I don't believe it. I don't believe it, you know? Then we all jumped out of our cars and said, we got to help somebody, help somebody.
I saw people on the top over there trying to jump off, you know, trying to get away because they was told there was some cars on fire. And the one guy we helped, I told him, I said, you know, you made it. And he looked at me, I said, you know, you made it. I don't think if we didn't come over that bridge and just didn't care about what's happening here, you know, a whole lot of people probably would have died up there.
You're sitting here with this major structure that has just obliterated people in a fashion that none of us had ever seen before, and none of us were really prepared to deal with. It wasn't a picture ending. It wasn't the way you would have scripted it if you could, but under the circumstances, we we took what we could get. You'd walk up and there would be sort of little signs of life, if you will. The radio would still be on, and you'd be listening to static, or sometimes the station had come back up and you'd hear the station playing rock and roll or classical music. Or some cars had been abandoned. People had actually gotten out, and you'd hear the little chimes of the thing telling you, by the way, you left your lights on. It had the real sense of sort of like the day after of lives interrupted on an abrupt and very final basis.
As I looked up, I saw cars in front of me just sinking. Everybody was sinking, and all the pavement was just tumbling and falling, and the bridge was opening up. I remember my eye was hurting, and it felt very wet. And my back hurt. Yeah, I was in pain when they got me out. And I didn't feel right, and I remember thinking to myself, I wish I could just die, because I felt that bad.
She was covered with blood, was complaining of some pain in her back, and it looked like she had blood all over her legs. We thought she had broken her leg. I rolled the lid back and we looked. I didn't see an eyeball in there, so I thought she'd lost her eye.
How did you get me out?
The fire department got you out. They basically have these two instruments. One's called the jaws of life, and then they have these hydraulic tin snips, and they just sort of open the side of the car up.
I feel really lucky to be alive, and maybe it really wasn't my time. I know that sounds crazy, but it's about the only way I can explain it.
We have been in a rescue operation that started shortly after 6 o'clock this morning. That rescue operation is now over with.
He had some bruises, and I understand that he had a leg that was pinned, and it was necessary to use the jaws of life to extricate that leg.
He looked pretty good for somebody who was pinned under his expressway for 4 days.
While much of San Francisco was undamaged by the earthquake, one part of town was hit hard, the marina section of the city. Buildings collapsed, streets buckled, homes were damaged. And then there was the threat of fire.
We've got serious problems, obviously. Secure your residence. Shut off the gas, shut off electricity, store water, prepare for aftershocks, prepare for 3 days of no services. You got 90 minutes of light left. You better make use of your time. We're looking at 3-story buildings that are now 1 story. The underground is of sand and landfill. It's very loose. We have older structures that are 2, 3, and 4 stories, some even 5. Thus, they are old buildings, haven't been restructured for earthquake proofing. And then we had a major earthquake, I believe, over 6, and this is the result of this.
Citizens were already out with tools trying to get people out. Then we could hear a guy inside calling for help, and I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. I got halfway under the building and realized that I couldn't see where he was. I wasn't going to be able to see where he was, so we went inside the building and went through the floor to try to get to him, and it just took too long. He was dead when they finally got to him.
By looking at the damage and the fire and all the destruction in the area, it's just amazing that there wasn't more loss of life.
While much of the nation's attention following the quake was centered in the Bay Area, the epicenter of the earthquake was some 60 miles to the south near Santa Cruz. It wasn't until sometime later, when communications were restored, that the extent of the damage was known.
I'm very concerned about what you just mentioned, the areas that we're not hearing from. And that's the epicentral area, the San Jose, which is a very large metropolitan area, the Monterey Peninsula, the Hollister area, where the San Andreas, Hayward, and Calaveras faults all come together.
I went out to feed my meter. On the way back, 20 seconds more, I would have been through the door and back where this building collapsed on top of the place I was working, where the roof came down and everything. It was a real scary experience, and I'm still a little shaken up. My friend's still buried in there.
We computed the magnitude at 6.9 on the Richter scale. We have reports of damage and injuries. One person dead of a heart attack there and 4 injured. We have partial collapse of buildings in San Jose, damage in San Benito, damage in Santa Clara, San Mateo, and it was felt in western Nevada.
Most San Franciscans spent much of the night following the quake in total darkness. Electricity had been cut off throughout much of the city. It wasn't until the following morning that the extent of the damage became fully known.
There were gas leaks, there was the fire. I couldn't get to it.
Horrible. I lost everything.
What they don't understand is, when the marina is not made up of just all wealthy people. If they lose their buildings, who cares? I mean, most of us in our building have worked real hard to get these buildings, and if they go, they're gone, you know? I mean, November 1st, our mortgages are due. And to just be told over the phone that, yeah, you've got a red card and it's to be demolished, and you feel you have no recourse or anything, it was just very upsetting.
You go in there, you have 15 minutes. An earthquake was 15 seconds, and you have 15 minutes to take your whole entire life.
Last night it was easy to pacify him. Everyone was kind of just numb, and we just said, okay, just go up and lie down, and they would take that. This morning it's more like, I want to know what happened to my apartment, where my pets are, I can't find my uncle, you know, whatever the issue is, and it's not so easy to just say it'll be okay. You know, they've really got a lot of questions, and we don't have very many answers at this point.
When the president comes to see for himself, it is meant to symbolize the nation's concern that people are hurting in the wake of disaster. When the president comes to see for himself, he becomes the symbol of the federal government and the money that people need to put their lives back together again.
If we waited around for the government to do this, I don't know how long it would have taken before these people would have been fed. Sliced meats, sliced cheeses. I'm a private chef right now. I have an extensive restaurant background, and I love food. This is the largest group of people I've ever cooked for. I don't live far from here. So I walked over about 8 o'clock in the morning and found 2 people making sandwiches with one plastic butter knife on one of the little wooden tables in the school cafeteria. They had a couple of donated loaves of bread, and they had a package of already sliced meat from one of the local restaurant's refrigerators. And I took a look at this and realized that this was not going to serve, a shelter, an earthquake shelter. This was not going to work. So, of course, under those circumstances, no holds are barred, and not being able to find anybody who was in position of authority in the school itself, I grabbed a couple of PG&E guys from out on the street with their crowbar, and we broke down a few of the doors into the kitchen and moved in. So right now, what we've come to from this one table making sandwiches with a plastic butter knife is a volunteer staff of probably 50 or 60 people, serving up to about 2,000 meals a day. This is grassroots. This is community. This is people who care, who want to help. We're not a typical soup kitchen. This is a shelter in the marina in San Francisco. It's an important thing to take care of your friends and your family. I feel a sense of family with these people in this shelter now that I didn't expect to feel.
After 1:30. Okay, so I figure we can mobilize, get this stuff.
But you go for the pictures, the photographs, the autographed baseballs, the memories you have that you want to show your kids and say, oh, gee, I lost that in the 1989 earthquake.
Who can go over to the desk? Face some paintings or whatever.
Well, I'm tired. It's been pretty confusing, but actually the people have really gotten together, and the people, I wouldn't want to go through this in any other city but San Francisco.
About 5 o'clock, everybody was getting ready for the game. It was one of the most beautiful days that we've had all year in San Francisco. The weather was unseasonably warm. It was like a summer afternoon. And people were getting ready to listen to the radios, and they were, sipping cappuccino in the sidewalk cafes of San Francisco and with the TVs turned up so they could hear it. And then it turned out that we were going to have an exciting day, a day that was much more exciting and horrible than anybody imagined.
I'll tell you what, we're having an earthquake.
When this one hit, I was in fact doing an interview in a cafe not far from my house with a woman who is from the East and doesn't know very much about earthquakes and was terrified. And our restaurant building began to shake. I looked up and saw the beams up above moving back and forth. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, earthquake, I have to calm down the lady I'm talking to. It's not too bad.
But this was different. From the start, everybody could tell it was different. The houses didn't squeak, the houses roared. There was something that was very violent, that the earth moved back and forth as if the earth was in a big box and somebody was shaking it back and forth. And then the power went off. Within minutes, thousands of people started coming up from the ground, from where the subways had been, and the subways had all been halted because there wasn't any power. And they started streaming into the streets. I've never seen so many people downtown.
And the phones went down. I was there alone with my children, trying to calm them down, an arm around each of them, watching, without telling my children what we were watching, television pictures of an enormous fire that seemed to be engulfing the block in which my grandmother lives.
In the distance, from the north of the city, the smoke began to fill the skies, and if you stood on any of the hills, you could see the sky as it began to darken for the evening. You could see the whole sky by the north part of the bay was lit up and burning from the horrible fires that came out of the Marina district. The first we heard, it was very vague, but we had heard that the Bay Bridge had collapsed. That was real scary. The Bay Bridge, and then of course with the news of the freeway, those things were built to withstand earthquakes that were bigger than the great earthquake of 1906.
The arbitrary nature of the devastation here is just stunning. Down at the freeway, which is where I've spent most of my time since, in fact, I spent the entire first night there. Walked down in the darkness, no light whatsoever except the moonlight and the floodlights playing up on an extraordinary mess of broken concrete and splayed, sort of spaghetti-like iron bar sticking straight out from the freeway, an entire mile of flattened concrete, made me feel as though I was hallucinating. I had a very hard time sort of grasping that that's what I was looking at.
The next morning, that's when we began to awake to that real sense that the world had changed, that something was different and it was never going to be the same again. In neighborhoods, you had sort of earthquake voyeurs come into the Marina district, and they'd want to have their picture taken in front of a collapsed house, and so they'd be having their picture taken like they were tourists, and 20 feet away would be the people who lived in that house sitting on the sidewalk with all of their earthly possessions, waiting for news about where they might live. Another thing that happened is that people in the neighborhoods then started getting together and turning to each other for support. Neighbors who'd never met each other started getting to find out who their neighbors were as they began to do what neighbors are supposed to do, which is take care of each other. We live in a humanistic age, and I think we all believe that, that we are the masters of the universe, that we as human beings. The people who lived in the Dark Ages, it was much easier for them to cope with things like earthquakes, I think, because they believed that they were nothing more than the pawns of forces that were beyond their control. But we, in our enlightened age, think that, have come to believe that we're the masters of everything. People don't get sick because we have antibiotics, and, we have, we have clean water, and we have heat, and we have all these things that we never question, and then something like this happens, and you realize that, we are small creatures still.
Hello, I'm Diane Sawyer. This is side 2 of an interactive video disc, a special report on the Bay Area quake of 1989. This side of the disc concentrates on the many questions left in the aftermath of the quake. How do earthquakes happen? What's being done to minimize the damage? Where is the next great earthquake in the U.S. likely to hit? And finally, how can you prepare? In short, what have we learned from the quake of '89? Also, you will be able to compare this earthquake with others, including the devastating one in 1906 that destroyed most of San Francisco. Explore what interests you by going directly to the topics you want. Remember, relive, and learn from the quake of '89. This man, Charles Richter, an American seismologist, developed the earthquake measurement system in 1935, rating the Earth's vibrations on a scale of 1 to 10. A 1 on the Richter scale is barely noticeable, like vibrations caused by a tractor-trailer on a highway. But a 5 or 6 on the Richter scale can't be ignored. And don't be misled by what seem to be small differences in degree. Every time you go up a number on the Richter scale, you're registering 10 times the force of the number before. In other words, an 8 is 10 times as powerful as a 7 on the Richter scale. California's San Andreas Fault. It is a name you have probably heard again and again, but perhaps seen only as a line on a map. Well, we're going to take you now on a tour, not one you can book through any travel agency. This morning, we chartered a B-25 and had it flown over the fault from the Salton Sea in Southern California to Point Reyes north of San Francisco, a distance of 450 miles. The voice you're about to hear belongs to Arthur Sylvester, a geologist who has studied the San Andreas Fault extensively, and he flew along with us on the ride.
Today we're going to follow the San Andreas Fault north out of Mexico as it slices through California farmland to San Francisco. The shadow of the aircraft marks the trace of the fault on the ground. As we approach the deep canyon here, we're going on up through the Mojave Desert past Los Angeles, which is about 40 miles from the San Andreas Fault at this point. Our flight path drops into still another deep canyon north of Los Angeles, and the fault follows the bottom of the canyon. The fault is easy to follow in many places because it's marked by gullies and straight lines. You can see the shadow of the plane following the trace of the fault. The aircraft engine points along the trace of the fault here, marked by sharp gullies in the middle of the picture. This is farm and ranch land devoid of vegetation, and hardly any people live here. Here the fault makes a great scar on the landscape, as if someone had dragged a giant stick along the ground. Again, the shadow follows the fault. James Dean tragically met his death here at the intersection of the fault and Highway 46 in Central California. Now we're in Chelan Valley, where the fault goes through Randolph Hearst Ranch. The fault also goes through the Almond Inn Winery in Central California. Parkfield, where earthquakes have happened almost every 22 years for the last 150 years. And where seismologists think one of the next earthquakes will happen on the San Andreas Fault system. In the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, it all started here in San Juan Bautista. Fault ruptured about 200 miles north towards San Francisco. Lexington Reservoir was the epicenter for the major earthquake that struck the San Francisco Bay region just a few days ago and caused so much tragic damage there. The San Andreas Fault does not go through San Francisco, but passes offshore of the Golden Gate and comes back on shore in the Point Reyes Peninsula area. In 1906, fences and roads were offset 15 feet here. The fault goes through here past Point Reyes National Seashore, up through Tamales Lagoon, across Bodega Head, and then goes on out to sea.
Now that you've seen the fault from the air, we'll take you to it on the ground, to an area that some people say could be the site of the next great earthquake. Joining us now from the Cajon Pass, which is about 100 miles northeast of Los Angeles, is Dr. Tom Henye. He is a professor of geophysics at the University of Southern California and is an expert on the San Andreas Fault. Dr. Henye, first of all, you're not going to do anything too exuberant here, are you? That looks fairly treacherous.
Yes, I'm Diane. I'm hanging here on the side of a outcropping in the San Andreas Fault zone.
What is responsible for that jagged formation?
Well, it's very highly fractured from repeated motions along the San Andreas Fault. As the San Andreas moves and grinds along in its inexorable movement, it fractures the rocks all around it, and you can see some of the fractures here in the shadows in the nighttime.
Well, is this hard rock?
This rock, Diane, was formed initially about 10 miles or so into the earth. It was very, very hard and compacted at that time, but it's been brought to the surface and at the same time sheared and fractured by the San Andreas Fault movements. It's so fractured, in fact, that you can see that when I take my hammer here, big chunks of the rock fall off of the outcropping. As a matter of fact, there are pieces that I can even just break and fracture with my hand into very, very, very small pieces of rock, so shattered by the movements on the fault, just like a windshield at the time of an automobile crash.
Just the result of that abrasion. Let me ask you this, how deep is the plate that you're standing on? How deep in the earth?
Well, the plate here is approximately 50 miles down, we believe. It's a brittle outer part of the crust that's floating on a more mobile part of the inner part of the earth.
And underneath that?
Well, below that, of course, is the core. The outer part of the earth below the crust is very viscous, and it's like taffy, and the plates move across this region.
Well, the ancients, at least the Oriental ancients, used to say that earthquakes were caused by large fish which moved under the earth and flapped their tails. You're saying it really does have the quality, I guess, of a waterbed, to use a loose term.
No, we don't have that. We don't have the fish out here. We have giant forces which are constantly at work pushing on these plates, and the stresses build up, and after some time, which we still don't understand, the plates give way and we have a giant earthquake like we experienced in San Francisco.
There are literally millions of faults across the country. One of them runs across Manhattan, from the East River to the Hudson River and beyond. In fact, I'm standing near it right here, right in the middle of Central Park. This one is harmless, as most of them are. Geologists say they're worried about those few that have moved in the recent past, in the last 50,000 years or so. Of course, the San Andreas, which scars the length of California, is the most active. But the New Madrid zone in the Mississippi Valley is a close second. It regularly sets off little quakes, thousands of them. Experts agree that Memphis is the city most exposed to the threat of a bigger one.
It's scary, it really is. I don't know how to react.
It makes me feel like that we could be wiped away. Just, you know, all it takes is for it to come, and it will come eventually.
Some government scientists say there's a 75% chance a big one will ripple through the New Madrid zone by the turn of the century. Besides Memphis, St. Louis, perhaps even Chicago and New York could lie in its path.
The potential for destruction and really catastrophe from a large earthquake in the central United States really can't be understated.
New Madrid last caused a huge quake in the early 1800s. It created this lake in Memphis. Memphis is a city built on mud, so it's especially vulnerable. Its modern high-rises probably wouldn't fall. They're flexible, built to sway in the wind. But older buildings like this one and this, experts expect, would crumble. Critics say that Memphis just isn't taking the quake threat seriously enough. The city council decided not to make this new sports complex quake-resistant.
I felt we were being irresponsible as a group in not investing money to protect the public from something that I see could happen in the Memphis area.
Other earthquake hotspots are here in Salt Lake City. The Wasatch Fault runs along its eastern side. And in the northwest, an earthquake zone called Cascadia subduction dips beneath Seattle and Portland. But the big questions remain. When and where will the next one hit?
I'm a little pessimistic now that we're ever going to be able to say tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock we're going to have an earthquake.
But to the question, can it happen here in Memphis and Seattle and St. Louis and more? The answer is yes.
Soon after scientists learned how to measure earthquakes, they began designing buildings which could survive them. Today's skyscrapers withstand the shifting of the earth because they're built on special foundations. Rubberized cushions and reinforced steel enable these new buildings to sway back and forth as much as several feet without falling. As it turned out, San Francisco's modern skyscrapers were the safest place to be during the recent earthquake. Some of its older structures couldn't absorb the shock. They cracked and came tumbling down.
Most homes aren't prepared in any way, shape, or form for a major earthquake. There are lots of things that people can do to protect themselves, and they're quite simple things. Microwave ovens, which are formidable flying objects and will do a lot of damage. This one I've attached with Velcro, and it's not going to go anyplace in an earthquake. Kitchen cabinets. First, the cabinet has to be securely fastened to the wall, and then in this kitchen we've used positive latching touch latches, and on each shelf, on the upper shelves, there's a wire with a spring mechanism to make easy access to larger objects. Here in the living room, I'm concerned with heavy objects that might fly across the room and cause injury, or could block an exit. This heavy stereo speaker I've attached to the wall. Another really good idea is at a hall closet or at an entrance closet to keep a first aid kit, the emergency tools, the extra batteries, a flashlight, and fire extinguishers. Another way to secure objects of art, computers, computer terminals, and hi-fi equipment is with a Velcro pad on leashes. This type of shelving unit is very popular. The first thing that you have to do is make sure that the track is firmly attached to the wall, preferably to the studs. Then the shelf should be attached to the bracket. I've used a bracket strap here, which looks something like this. Then you supply some sort of a post or holding thing for whatever wire or restraint you're going to use. The restraint can be wire, string, monofilament line. After an earthquake, gas is frequently a problem. If you smell gas, shut the gas off at your gas main. To do that, you must know that it's at the meter and identify it in advance and have the proper tool. I keep my gas shut-off wrench attached to the gas meter at all times. To shut it off, I use 1/4 of 1 turn on the valve. After an earthquake, food will be in short supply. It would be a really good idea to keep at least a week's supply of food for the entire household. The responsibility is your own individual responsibility for your own safety. That's correct. Nobody can be expected to come to your aid for a long period of time.
Every big earthquake produces such devastation, people naturally assume no one can possibly last long trapped in there. But they do, again and again. After 9 days wedged in dark crevices of a collapsed Mexico City hospital, newborn babies were brought out, their survival helped by their baby fat and natural tendency to sleep a lot. No brain damage, they went on to develop normally. Adults have often been pulled from earthquake rubble alive in the 2nd week, some surviving so long because they'd been injured, lain in a coma which slowed down metabolism and the need for water. In cold weather, earthquake rubble can sometimes wrap a victim like an insulating blanket. There's no telling what's inside the chaos of collapsed buildings. In Romania, one man lasted 3 weeks cramped in a ruined basement discotheque beside a tiny trickle of water. Thus the horrid necessity to dismantle earthquake ruins fast. Only some of those trapped die right away. As hours and days go by, the unseen dying goes on. So the sooner you take everything apart, the more people you save. But dismantling structures with the speed and delicacy needed to save lives is an art which modern engineering has yet to perfect. And even professional rescue workers, including some of those in San Francisco, have to keep learning for some reason that you can't know that no one's alive in there till you know for sure. Bill Blakemore, ABC News. In San Francisco's Wheel Elementary School, the word for today is earthquake. Say it, read it, spell it, tell it.
So what was it like?
Scary. The light turned out. There's an earthquake. You hid under the desk. And then the ground started shaking. I was worried about my parents. This is we're gonna die.
Doctors say mental aftershocks are felt by everyone in the earthquake area, though some will deny the feelings. Each person works it out differently, rebuilding a sense of what's normal after what's normally the most solid thing of all has shifted and swayed beneath their feet.
The saying of the rug being pulled from underneath you is certainly very apropos. Symptoms will range from feeling very fearful, terrorized, helpless, out of control. It could be headaches, stomach aches, difficulty falling asleep.
For the vast majority of people, these symptoms will work themselves out through the instinctive therapy of talking about it a lot with friends and following the public discussions in the media. But for people who were already emotionally shaky or who lost a lot, the symptoms may last longer.
People want to know, what's next? Where's their next home? What can they do? How can they get their life on again?
And for some, say counselors, it takes a while for what's happened just to hit them before they can even begin to rebuild.
It was Wednesday, April 18th, 1906, at precisely 12 minutes past 5 in the morning when the great earthquake hit San Francisco. For 200 miles along the San Andreas Fault, the crust of the earth slipped as much as 21 feet. There was no Richter scale then, but seismologists have estimated the earthquake would have registered 8.3. It remains the greatest natural disaster to hit any North American city.
In the hours just after the quake, people wandered the streets of San Francisco in confusion. They had a singular hurt expression, said one observer, as if a good friend had suddenly wronged them. In some districts, people had no idea about the amount of damage that had been done. At Valencia Station, commuters waited impatiently for a train that would never come. The number of people killed by the earthquake was not yet known, but it was clear that the worst damage and the most casualties were in the neighborhood south of Market. All over the Mission District, tenements folded like pasteboard. From the wreckage, the cries of the trapped and injured could be heard. Those who survived could not be treated at the city's hospitals, which had sustained major damage in the quake. They were taken to the dance hall where the night before Miss Floria had reigned as the roller queen. That morning, what no one had realized yet was that the greatest tragedy of San Francisco was still to come. The shock snapped gas mains and toppled chimneys. 50 fires had started almost simultaneously. Although the city's telephone and central alarm system were destroyed, the individual fire brigades flew into action. But when they arrived on the scene, there was no water. The quake had ruptured nearly all the water mains coming into the city. Hydrants gave off a trickle, then ran dry. By 7 a.m., Mayor Eugene Schmitz had received status reports from the police and fire departments. Half a dozen fires were raging out of control. The mayor issued a proclamation warning that looters would be shot on sight. He also deputized special police whose actions would later be questioned. But the real power lay in the hands of Brigadier General Frederick Funston, the ranking Army officer in San Francisco. Funston commandeered automobiles and rounded up troops. By 8 a.m., more than 1,700 men had arrived downtown. Their orders were to fight the fires, evacuate citizens, and prevent crimes. But in the chaos that followed, the soldiers themselves were seen looting. By the time troops began patrolling the streets, a good part of the city was in flames. At about 9 a.m., residents in the Hayes Valley district started a fire to cook breakfast, unaware that the quake had damaged their chimney. This was the result. By noon, the ham and eggs fire, as it came to be known, was on its way to claiming a good part of the city. It was believed that many of the modern office buildings could withstand the flames. Most prominent, the Call Building, one of America's first skyscrapers. The building caught fire shortly after 10:30 a.m. It burned from the top down, its elevator shafts acting like flues. A few firemen were trapped on the upper floors and incinerated. About this time, Funston decided that the only hope of stopping the destruction was to use dynamite to create a fire break. At 1 p.m., a demolition team raced across Market Street to blow up the Monadnock building. The dynamite didn't work. All that was accomplished was to gut the interior of the building without bringing it down. Around the corner, a telegraph operator tapped out San Francisco's last message to the outside world.
2:30 p.m. The city practically ruined by fire. It's within half a block of us. The Call Building is burned out entirely. The Examiner Building just fell in a heap. Fire all around us in every direction. Destruction by earthquake, something frightful. They are blowing up standing buildings that are in the path of flames with dynamite. No water, it's awful. I want to get out of here or be blown up.
By 3 p.m., all telegraph lines were down. The city was isolated. Black powder and dynamite in the hands of inexperienced men often spread the fire rather than contained it. That evening, a young newspaper reporter named Jack London surveyed the scene. "I knew it was all doomed," he wrote. "I walked for miles and miles through empty blocks." In the intense heat of the city, 2 troopers sat on their horses and watched. Surrender was complete. 28,000 buildings were destroyed. In all the chaos, no one knows exactly how many people died. More than 3,000, some historians believe. But San Francisco did not stay down for very long. Within 3 years, a new city arose on the edge of the bay, on landfill. This is part of it, the Marina district, which suffered some of the worst damage during the quake of 1989. But as in 1906, there is, again, an indomitable spirit here, a sense that 83 years later, this city by the bay once more will triumph over tragedy. Ken Kashiwahara, ABC News, San Francisco.
You probably saved my life. Now what can I do for you?
Take us to Shanghai.
Shanghai?
Yeah. What's the matter?
Earthquake. Take your time, folks. Now, everybody walk easy. It's all right now. It's all right. Come on. All right, okay.
When a big story breaks like an earthquake, the news media go to work in a big way. And oddly enough, in covering this earthquake, television has had an easier time of it than the local newspapers. TV remote trucks, like the ones we're using right here in this area, just turn on their onboard power generator, point their antenna dish at a relay satellite, and go on the air. But for the San Francisco newspapers, the earthquake was not only a big story, it was a big obstacle.
The Morning Chronicle, for instance, like the Afternoon Examiner, has been published each day as usual, but not at all by the usual methods. The newspaper's building has had no main electric power. Only a few lights have been jury-rigged. Only a partial computer system is available. Most of the phones have been out. It isn't just bad, it's been awful, according to executive editor William German.
It seemed impossible to gather news, to edit news, to produce copy, to then produce a page for printers. None of that was available. We had to invent a new system.
Old way or new, lights or no lights, the heart of the news business is getting the facts and putting them in perspective.
Anybody else interested?
Anybody else interested?
There will be the survivors list coming too, right?
We're just going to spike it. We sent a second take with the insert, so they're just going to go back to the original.
For the Chronicle, all this has been a group effort, with reporters Randy Schultz and Susan Sword rewriting the field information to come up with the lead story.
Scores of reporters are in the field, and they call their notes in, and they often want to tell you more detail than you need, and you have to politely try to take what you need and hang up on them and go on to the next person that wants to talk to you.
Do you have a pride of authorship that says, touch one word and you're dead?
No, not at all, and on a story like this, you can't permit yourself to have that. You have to approach it with no ego, and if your pal turns to you and says, Susan, I can't believe that, that's unbelievably trite, you have to be able to look at him and say, you're right, what do you suggest? And urge parents to contact their children.
I think we should just say period, and then just say parents are urged.
Okay.
Careful words and careful pictures. Here, the challenge always is to take and print a gripping shot. But photographer John O'Hara says for him, there are limits.
You want to get close to the point, but at the same time, the human being, the person's dead. And once somebody's died, they're gone. I mean, you know, but you want to show a little bit of respect.
When the building front collapsed at 6th and Townsend in San Francisco, crushing autos and killing 5 people, respect for O'Hara meant shooting it this way.
When they finally cut off the top part of the car, and I could see a little bit of the person, I took a picture. There was no face, there was just an arm or something. Then when they lifted her up, and she was intact, and they carried her out of the car, I didn't take a picture, because I don't need that kind of a photo. I don't enjoy it. You know, I feel for the person.
Like the photographers, when the reporters write, they must consider a mix. In the case of Randy Schultz and Susan Sword, who are writing the lead story, the trick is to combine hard facts with gripping prose. And when you're writing the lead, which is the most important?
It's a constant balancing act. You're trying to do both all the time, and you succeed in a limited measure often because you're under such a time pressure. But I love that challenge. I'm a team player, so I see everybody that fed the story to us, all the editors that looked at it, but when I stand in the line for my donuts in the morning and I can look and see the paper and people are reading it and you know what's in it, that is a special feeling. It's part of why I'm in the business.
Well, here's this morning's Chronicle, and here's the lead sentence that Randy and Susan composed. A determined but battered Bay Area, faced with mounting casualties and soaring damage estimates, prepared yesterday to bury its dead and repair the destruction wrought by Tuesday's massive earthquake.
This has been a presentation of ABC News, where more Americans get their news than from any other source.